The little black girl hid beneath the observation tower, asking the biker why her mom didn't return last night. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was a cool evening, and the carnival lights flickered in the distance. The sounds of laughter and excitement echoed across the grounds, but there was a much quieter, much darker story unfolding beneath the observation tower. A little girl, no more than 10, sat hidden in the shadows, her small body trembling as tears streamed down her face. Her clothes were worn and dirty, her face streaked with the remnants of her tears. She was alone, or so it seemed. Her hands clutched the edge of the tower as she peered around cautiously, as if expecting someone to come. The hustle and bustle of the carnival, the bright lights, and the music couldn't distract her from the gnawing emptiness inside. Why didn't she come back last night? The girl whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. Her name was Tiana, and her world had been slowly unraveling. The only thing she remembered clearly was the promise her mother had made before she left the house the night before. "I'll be back soon, baby girl. I promise," her mother had said. Tiana had waited, hoping, but when the hours stretched into the night and her mother still hadn't returned, her hope began to fade. The place they called home wasn't much, a small, dilapidated apartment on the edge of town, but it was all Tiana had. Her mother was everything to her. She was the one who comforted her when she was scared, the one who told her stories before bed, the one who promised everything would be okay. But now, sitting alone beneath the observation tower, Tiana didn't feel okay. She felt abandoned. As the night grew darker, her fear grew stronger. She didn't know where her mom was or why she didn't come back. Her mother had always been strong, always told Tiana she could take care of herself, but now it seemed like she had vanished without a trace. Desperation filled Tiana's chest as she finally heard the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. She looked up to see a figure, an imposing man in a leather jacket, a biker, walking toward her. His face was hard and weathered, but there was something in his eyes that told Tiana he was different from the other men she had seen in the neighborhood. "Are you okay, little one?" the biker asked, his voice calm but firm. Tiana didn't know how to answer. Her throat was tight. Her chest ached with the weight of the emotions she had been holding back. She hesitated for a moment, then whispered, "Why didn't she come back last night? My mom promised she would." The biker knelt down beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. He could see the fear in her eyes, the confusion, and the hurt. Tiana was just a little girl, yet the world around her had already started to crumble. "Come on, kid," he said softly. "Let's get you to a safe place. We'll figure this out." As the biker helped Tiana to her feet, she clung to him, desperate for comfort, for answers. She had no idea what was coming next, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to face it alone. The night was far from over, and the mystery of her mother's disappearance was only just beginning. As the biker helped Tiana to her feet, she clung to him with a tight grip, her small fingers digging into his leather jacket. The sound of the carnival continued in the distance, but it felt like a different world now, one she wasn't a part of. She wasn't sure where they were going, but she knew she didn't want to stay in the shadow of the observation tower, where all her fear and confusion had been. The biker's voice was calm, reassuring. "We're going to figure this out, kid. Don't worry." Tiana didn't answer, her throat too tight to speak. She only nodded as the man guided her toward a row of motorcycles parked by the carnival gates. His bike was massive, gleaming under the soft light of the street lamps. Tiana had never been this close to a motorcycle before, let alone ridden one. The sound of the engine as the biker started it was loud, vibrating through her chest, but strangely comforting. He helped her onto the bike, securing her with a helmet. "Hold on tight, kid," he said gently as he revved the engine. The roar of the bike drowned out everything else. As they sped away from the carnival, Tiana felt the wind rush past her, carrying away the heaviness in her heart, even if just for a moment. They rode through dark streets, the city slowly fading behind them. The biker didn't speak much, his focus on the road ahead, but Tiana's mind raced with questions she didn't know how to ask. Why didn't her mom come back? Where was she? Was she okay? The silence between them felt strange, but Tiana didn't mind. She had learned to deal with silence. It was all she had known for the past few months, as her mom had grown quieter and more distant. The biker's voice interrupted her thoughts. What's your mom's name, kid? Tiana hesitated. She hadn't said her mom's name to anyone in a long time. Her name's Samantha, she whispered. Samantha Coleman. The biker nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. We'll find her, Tiana. I promise. His words felt like a small thread of hope, something she hadn't dared to hold on to for a while. After what seemed like hours, the biker pulled into a quiet neighborhood, stopping in front of a house that looked like it hadn't seen much attention in years. The porch lights flickered, casting a dim glow on the cracked pavement. Tiana felt a pang of unease. The house was familiar, but not in a way that brought comfort. It was her mother's old house, the place she had once called home, before things started to fall apart. This is it, the biker said, getting off his bike. He turned to Tiana, who was frozen in place. Stay close. We're going to figure this out. Tiana reluctantly climbed off the bike, her legs shaky. As they approached the front door, the biker knocked once, then twice, before pushing it open. The house smelled of dust and stale air, the faint scent of something else, something more sinister, lingering in the air. Tiana's heart began to race. She didn't know what to expect, but the feeling of dread in her gut grew stronger with every step. They walked through the dark hallways, the creaking of the floorboards loud in the silence. The biker led her to the living room, where Tiana froze in place. There, sitting on the couch, was her mother's old boyfriend, a man she had hoped she would never see again. His name was Rick, and he was trouble. The last time Tiana had seen him, he was drunk and yelling at her mother. He had always made her feel scared. Rick looked up when they entered, his eyes widening in surprise. What the hell is this? He spat, his tone cold and threatening. The biker stepped forward, his stance unwavering. We're here for Samantha, he said, his voice steady. Where is she? Rick sneered, standing up and taking a step toward them. You think you can just walk in here and ask about her? Tiana's stomach churned, and she stepped back, clutching the biker's jacket for comfort. The biker didn't flinch, his eyes locked on Rick's. I'm not asking. I'm telling you. Tell me where she is, or I'm going to make you. The tension in the room thickened. Rick laughed, a hollow sound that made Tiana's skin crawl. You think you can scare me? I've dealt with people like you before. The biker's hand moved to the leather vest on his chest, where a patch marked him as a member of a notorious motorcycle club. I'm not here to play games, Rick, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Now, where's Samantha? Rick's expression faltered for a moment, and that was enough for the biker. He grabbed Rick by the collar, lifting him off the ground with surprising ease. Tell me, or I'll make you regret it, the biker growled. Tiana watched in stunned silence, her heart racing as the man she barely knew but had already come to trust confronted the one person who had hurt her family. Rick's eyes flickered with fear, but he didn't say a word. The biker tightened his grip. I'm not leaving until you talk, he warned. Finally, Rick's voice broke the silence. She's gone, he muttered. Tiana's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean, gone? She asked, her voice trembling. Rick dropped his gaze to the floor, avoiding her eyes. She left. A few days ago. I don't know where she went. I thought she was just gone for a while, but now? I don't know. I didn't want her to leave. Tiana felt her world tilt, her legs giving out beneath her. The biker caught her just in time, holding her up. It's okay, Tiana, he said softly. We'll find her. But Tiana wasn't so sure anymore. Where was her mother? And why had she left without a word? The answers seemed farther out of reach than ever before. The biker's words echoed in Tiana's mind. She's gone. Those words crushed her, sinking deep into her chest. Her mother, the one person who had always been there for her, had disappeared without a trace. The feeling of abandonment was worse than she had ever imagined. She stood there in the dimly lit house, clutching the biker's leather jacket, her body trembling. He kept his arm around her, trying to comfort her, but she couldn't shake the pain. Where did she go? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rick, still standing by the door, looked away, avoiding her eyes. I don't know. She packed up and left. I didn't want her to go, but she was gone before I could stop her. I haven't heard from her since. Tiana's heart shattered at those words. She couldn't believe it. Her mother couldn't just leave like that. There had to be something more to it. She took a shaky breath, her mind racing. The biker noticed the look in her eyes and bent down to her level. Tiana, we're going to find her, he said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. We won't stop until we do. Tiana nodded slowly, trying to hold back her tears. She didn't know what the biker meant by we, but something in his tone made her believe him. He wasn't going to give up, and neither would she. I want to help, she said quietly. The biker looked at her, his expression softening. I know you do, kid. But right now, you need to stay safe. Let us handle this. No, Tiana said, shaking her head. I need to be there. I need to know where she is. She's all I have left. The biker hesitated, his jaw tightening. He could see the determination in her eyes. She wasn't going to back down. With a sigh, he finally relented. All right, but you stick with me. Understood. Tiana nodded again, more firmly this time. Together, they left the house, stepping back into the cool night air. The biker helped Tiana onto his motorcycle again, and they set off into the night. The engine roared to life, and Tiana clung to him, her thoughts swirling with fear and confusion. Where had her mom gone? Why hadn't she come back? As they rode through the quiet streets, Tiana couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Her mother had never just walked out like this. She had always been strong, always promised she would take care of Tiana. This wasn't like her. They drove for what seemed like hours, the wind rushing past them, carrying away some of her worries, but not all of them. The city lights faded as they left the outskirts behind, heading into the darker, quieter parts of town. The biker's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled over to the side of the road, his face grim as he answered. Tiana could hear a low voice on the other end, muffled and distant, but she could tell it was serious. Yeah, the biker said, his voice low. I understand. We'll be there soon. He hung up and turned to Tiana. We've got a lead, he said, his eyes narrowing. I need you to stay close. Things are about to get intense. Tiana's heart skipped a beat. A lead? Could it be? Was her mom really out there? They rode in silence for a few more miles until they reached an old, abandoned building on the edge of town. The area was run down, the kind of place people avoided, the buildings boarded up and decaying. The biker parked his motorcycle behind a rusted fence, the gravel crunching under the tires. Tiana's stomach twisted with nerves as she followed him toward the building. Wait here, the biker said, holding up a hand. Stay out of sight. Tiana nodded, trying to steady her breath. She watched as the biker approached a group of men standing near the entrance. They spoke in low voices, exchanging a few tense words. The biker's posture was rigid, his face set in a hard expression. Tiana couldn't hear the conversation, but she didn't need to. The men were trouble. She could feel it. After a few moments, the biker returned to her side, his face hard with determination. Let's go, he said quietly, and they both moved toward the building. Inside, it was dark and musty, the air thick, with dust and the smell of mold. Tiana coughed, her eyes watering as she squinted in the dim light. The biker led her through the hallway, his hand on her shoulder, guiding her carefully. They reached a room at the back of the building. The door was cracked open, and Tiana could hear muffled voices inside. The biker knocked once, sharply, then pushed the door open. Inside, a woman sat at a table, her back turned to them. She was older, with dark circles under her eyes, but when she turned to face them, Tiana's breath caught in her throat. It was her mother, Samantha Coleman. Tiana's heart leaped with relief and fear all at once. Mom? She whispered, her voice trembling. Her mother's face was gaunt, her skin pale and bruised, but she was alive. She turned slowly, her eyes wide with surprise. Tiana, she gasped, standing up too quickly. Oh my God, baby, you're here. Tiana ran to her mother, her heart pounding. She threw her arms around her, holding her tightly. For a moment, everything felt right again. But then Tiana noticed the look in her mother's eyes. There was something wrong. Something dark. Mom, what happened? Tiana asked softly, her voice breaking. Her mother looked away, as if she couldn't bear to say the words. The biker stepped forward, his voice steady. We need to get out of here, Samantha. Now. Her mother hesitated, then nodded. She looked down at Tiana, her expression filled with regret. I'm sorry, baby, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I never wanted you to see this. As Tiana stood in her mother's arms, holding onto her tightly, she could feel the weight of the last few days bearing down on them both. The relief of finding her mother was overwhelming, but the fear still lingered. Samantha's eyes were filled with guilt, and Tiana couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story, something her mother wasn't telling her. The biker didn't waste any time. He stepped forward, his hand on Tiana's shoulder, guiding her toward the door. "We need to move, now," he said, his voice calm but insistent. Samantha nodded slowly, her face pale as she glanced at Tiana. "We're not safe here," she whispered, looking around the room nervously. "Not yet." Tiana's heart pounded in her chest. What had happened to her mother? Why was she acting so strange? They hurried out of the room, and the biker led them down the dark hallway. Tiana felt a strange sense of urgency in the air, as though something was about to happen. They reached the front door of the building, and as the biker pushed it open, they were met by the sound of approaching footsteps. Tiana's breath caught in her throat. The biker turned, his eyes scanning the area. "Get to the bike," he said urgently. "Now." Samantha hesitated, but Tiana tugged at her hand. "Mom, we need to go." Samantha nodded, her expression hardened. Together, they rushed to the motorcycle. The biker revved the engine, and Tiana climbed on behind him, holding her mother close as they sped off into the night. The streets were quiet, too quiet. As they rode through the deserted roads, Tiana couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had happened. She had found her mother, but now what? Where would they go? What had driven her mother to leave without telling her? The biker seemed to sense her thoughts. "We'll find somewhere safe," he said over his shoulder, his voice reassuring. "Just hold on." They rode through the night, the wind whipping past them, carrying away Tiana's fear, but not her questions. They reached a secluded area on the outskirts of town. The biker slowed the motorcycle and pulled into an old garage, hidden behind a row of trees. He parked the bike, and Tiana climbed off, feeling a sense of unease. The place looked abandoned, the kind of place where people went to disappear. The biker motioned for them to follow him inside. "Stay close," he said. Inside, the garage was dimly lit, with old motorcycles and tools scattered around. It looked like a safe house of some sort. The biker turned to Tiana and Samantha. "This is where we'll lay low for a while. You'll be safe here." Tiana could see that her mother was exhausted, her face pale, as if she hadn't been sleeping well. She could tell something was wrong, but her mother wasn't saying a word. "Mom, what happened?" Tiana asked softly. Samantha avoided her gaze, her hands trembling as she sat down on a bench in the corner of the room. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered. "I never wanted you to see any of this." The biker moved closer, his tone firm, but kind. "Samantha, you don't have to explain everything right now. We need to focus on keeping you both safe." But Tiana wasn't satisfied with that. She had so many questions. Why had her mother left? Why had she been so distant lately? And who were the people her mother was running from? "Please, Mom," Tiana pleaded, her voice cracking. "Tell me what's going on." Samantha sighed deeply, her eyes filled with regret. "It's not safe for us, Tiana," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are people looking for us." Tiana's stomach churned. "Who? What?" Samantha's gaze flickered to the biker before looking back at Tiana. "I didn't want to get you involved in this," she said. "But it's too late now." Tiana could feel the tension in the air, the heaviness of the secrets her mother was hiding. She wanted to know more, but something told her that pressing her mother for answers now wouldn't help. The biker stepped in again, his voice calm. "We'll keep you safe. That's all that matters right now." He turned to Samantha. "You need to rest. We've got a plan to get you both out of here, but it's going to take time." Samantha nodded, her shoulders sagging as she leaned back against the wall, exhausted. Tiana stayed close to her mother, still unsure of what to think or what was coming next. She wanted to believe that everything would be okay, but the fear in her mother's eyes told her otherwise. As the night dragged on, Tiana stayed awake, her thoughts racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The biker had promised to keep them safe, but Tiana knew that wasn't always enough. In this world, promises didn't always keep people safe. As dawn broke, the biker turned to them. "Get some rest. We've got a long road ahead of us." Tiana nodded but couldn't bring herself to sleep. The questions kept swirling in her mind. What had happened to her mother? And who was after them? The answers felt so far out of reach, but she had no choice but to wait. The biker had given her a sense of security, but deep down, Tiana knew they weren't out of danger yet. The morning light filtered through the small cracks in the garage, casting long shadows across the room. Tiana couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in her chest. She sat on the cold floor next to her mother, trying to hold back her questions. Samantha, exhausted and drained, had been quiet since they arrived. She seemed lost in her thoughts, her eyes distant. Tiana knew something was wrong, but her mother hadn't said a word. The biker, who had been their protector since the night they left the house, was outside, talking to someone on the phone. Tiana had learned to trust him, but she couldn't stop thinking about what her mother had said the night before. There were people after them. People her mother had been running from. The thought sent a chill through Tiana. Who could be after them? And why? It didn't make sense. Her mother had never said anything about enemies, and Tiana couldn't remember a time when things had been this bad. She watched as the biker walked back inside, his face serious, his eyes scanning the room. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice low but firm. Tiana's heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. Samantha looked up, her face pale. "What is it, Jim?" she asked, her voice hoarse. The biker, Jim, took a deep breath, running a hand through his short hair. "We've been made," he said, his tone grave. "They know where we are." Tiana's breath caught in her throat. "Who?" she whispered. Jim looked at her, then at Samantha. "The Serpents," he said. "They're the ones who've been after you, Samantha. I didn't think they'd find us this fast." Tiana felt a wave of panic wash over her. The Serpents. The name sent a shiver down her spine. She had never heard of them before, but something told her they were dangerous. "What do we do?" Tiana asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jim's eyes hardened. "We leave," he said simply. "We can't stay here. They'll be looking for us, and we don't have time to waste." Samantha stood up slowly, her hands shaking. "I can't run anymore, Jim," she said, her voice breaking. "I've been running for so long, and now they're after Tiana." She looked at her daughter, her face full of regret. "I never wanted you to be part of this. I never wanted to drag you into my mess." Tiana's eyes filled with tears. She didn't know what her mother had been through, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going to leave her now. "I'm not going anywhere without you, Mom," she said, her voice firm. Jim stepped forward, his face softening. "We'll figure this out, but we need to move now." He turned to Samantha. "Are you ready?" Samantha took a deep breath, wiping away the tears from her eyes. "I'm ready," she said, though her voice was shaky. "I have to be." The three of them walked outside, the cool morning air hitting Tiana's face as they made their way to the bikes. Tiana climbed on behind Jim, her mother sitting on the other bike beside them. Jim revved the engine, and they took off, leaving the safety of the garage behind. The wind whipped through Tiana's hair, and she gripped Jim tightly, trying to steady her racing thoughts. What were they running from? Why were they being hunted? As they rode through the empty streets, Tiana's mind spun with questions. She had never imagined her life would be like this. The once quiet, simple life she had known was now a distant memory. And now, with the Serpents on their tail, things had become much more complicated. They drove for miles, heading further away from the city, toward the unknown. Tiana didn't know where they were going, but she trusted Jim. He had promised to keep them safe, and that was enough for now. They stopped at a small diner on the outskirts of town, a place that looked as if it had been forgotten by time. Jim went inside to talk to someone, while Samantha and Tiana stayed outside. Tiana watched her mother, who seemed lost in her own world, her gaze distant. "Mom, what happened?" Tiana asked softly, breaking the silence. Samantha looked at her daughter, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I should have protected you better," she whispered. "I never wanted this life for you." Tiana's heart ached for her mother. "I don't care about that, Mom," she said, her voice trembling. "I just want us to be safe." Samantha smiled weakly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know, baby. I know." Jim came out of the diner a few minutes later, his face grim. "We've got to go," he said. "They're closer than we thought." The three of them climbed back onto the bikes, and Jim started the engine. As they drove off, Tiana's mind raced with fear and confusion. Who were the Serpents, and why were they after her mother? They couldn't keep running forever. Eventually, they would have to face them. But for now, they had to survive. Tiana squeezed her mother's hand, determined to stay strong. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. The ride had been long, and the road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly. Tiana's grip tightened on Jim's waist as the wind whipped past them, the hum of the engine beneath them almost drowning out her thoughts. They had left the city behind, the familiar surroundings now replaced by unfamiliar, desolate roads that led them deeper into uncertainty. Tiana had never been on such a long ride. But now, the only thing that mattered was staying close to her mother and Jim, the only two people she trusted. They stopped at a small gas station on the outskirts of a tiny town, the flickering neon sign above casting a dim light over the deserted lot. The station was old, with a cracked window and a rusted pump, but it was better than nothing. Jim parked the bike and turned off the engine. "Stay close," he said, his voice low, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Tiana nodded, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled in her stomach. Samantha, still quiet and pale, climbed off her bike and followed them inside. The air inside the station smelled of stale coffee and grease. Jim walked to the counter to speak with the clerk, while Tiana and her mother stayed near the door. Tiana could feel the weight of the silence between them. It had been like this for days. Her mother withdrawn, lost in her own world. Tiana longed to ask what had really happened, what they were running from, but something told her that her mother wasn't ready to talk yet. "Mom," Tiana whispered, her voice tentative. "What happened? Why are they after us?" Samantha looked at her daughter, her face a mix of fear and regret. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she just shook her head, as if the answer was too painful to say. "I don't know what to tell you, baby," she said finally, her voice cracking. "I never wanted you to get involved in this. I thought I could protect you. But now I don't know what's going to happen." Tiana felt her heart break for her mother. She had always seen her as strong, a woman who could handle anything. But now, her mother seemed so small, so fragile. "We'll be okay," Tiana said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "We have Jim. He'll protect us." Samantha forced a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I hope so," she whispered. Tiana didn't know how to make her mother feel better. They couldn't keep running forever, could they? How long could they stay hidden from the people chasing them? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Jim walked over, his face serious. "We need to get moving," he said, his tone urgent. "They're closing in. We don't have much time." Tiana's stomach dropped. The fear she had been trying to suppress surged back, stronger than before. "Who's closing in?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jim didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Samantha, his gaze hard. "The Serpents. They know we're here," he said, his voice steady but filled with tension. Tiana's heart raced. The Serpents. The name sounded like something out of a nightmare. Samantha's face drained of color at the mention of the group's name. "How do they know?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jim turned to her. "I don't know yet, but we have to move fast. We can't stay here any longer." Samantha nodded, her hands shaking as she took a deep breath. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice strained. "There's a safe house up north. It's not much, but it's secure for now," Jim replied. "We'll get there before they can catch up. But we need to be quick. They've probably got eyes everywhere." Tiana didn't ask any more questions. She just followed Jim and her mother back to the bikes. As they climbed on and started the engines, she felt a knot form in her stomach. The road ahead was uncertain, and the danger was real. But she had no choice. She had to trust Jim. She had to trust her mother. The engine roared to life as they sped off, the world around them a blur of darkness and shadows. They rode for hours, the night stretching out before them, until the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. The cold air bit at Tiana's skin, but she didn't care. She kept her eyes forward, her thoughts focused on staying safe, on getting to the safe house. As the hours passed, the tension in the air only grew stronger. Jim was quiet, his focus unwavering as he drove, and Samantha seemed lost in her own thoughts. Tiana couldn't help but wonder what they were all running from. What had happened to make her mother so afraid? Finally, they reached the safe house, a small cabin tucked away in the woods, far from the main road. Jim parked the bike and turned off the engine, his eyes scanning the area. "We're here," he said quietly. Tiana looked around. The cabin was small and isolated, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to block out the rest of the world. It didn't look like much, but for now, it was the safest place they could be. They went inside, and Tiana could feel the weight of the world lift off her shoulders, if only for a moment. The cabin smelled of wood and dust, and the air was thick with the silence that came with isolation. Samantha sat down on the worn couch, her shoulders slumped in exhaustion. Tiana sat beside her, not knowing what to say. Jim stepped outside to check the perimeter, leaving them alone. "Mom, I don't understand," Tiana said softly. "What's really going on?" Samantha looked at her daughter, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I never wanted you to know this, but the truth is, I was involved with people who weren't exactly good. The Serpents, they're dangerous. They've been after me for a long time." Tiana's heart skipped a beat. "Why, Mom?" she asked, her voice trembling. Samantha's eyes filled with tears. "Because of things I did, things I can't undo. I've tried to keep you safe, Tiana. But now," she paused, struggling to find the right words. "Now, I don't know if I can protect you anymore." Tiana's mind was reeling. Her mother had been hiding something for so long, and now it all made sense, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: they were far from safe. The Serpents were still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they found them. The cabin was quiet, but Tiana could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She sat beside her mother on the couch, the tension thick in the air. Samantha had just confessed, revealing the truth about the Serpents and the danger they were in. Tiana's mind was spinning with questions, too many to process all at once. She tried to focus on the present, to take in the fact that they were safe for the moment, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the question she couldn't shake. How did her mother get involved with people like the Serpents? She wanted to ask, but she could see that Samantha wasn't ready to share any more details. Instead, they sat in silence, waiting for Jim to return from checking the perimeter. Outside, the world felt quiet, almost too quiet. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees surrounding the cabin. Tiana's mind raced, her eyes flicking to the window as she tried to make sense of it all. What would happen next? How long could they stay hidden here? Would the Serpents come for them? As if reading her thoughts, Samantha broke the silence. "I never wanted you to know any of this, Tiana," she said, her voice soft but full of emotion. "I didn't want you to get caught up in my mess. But now it's too late." Tiana turned to look at her mother, her heart aching. "I don't care about that, Mom," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "I just want us to be safe." Samantha smiled faintly, her eyes filled with tears. "I know, baby. I know." Just then, the door creaked open, and Jim stepped inside, his face grim. "We need to move," he said, his voice low and urgent. Tiana's stomach dropped. "What's going on?" she asked, standing up quickly. Jim looked at them, his eyes dark. "The Serpents are getting closer. We can't stay here any longer. We need to leave now." Samantha stood up, her legs unsteady. "But where will we go?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. Jim didn't hesitate. "There's a place we can go," he said, his voice firm. "A safe house in the next town over. It's not much, but it's secure for now. We can lay low there until we figure out our next move." Samantha nodded, her face pale. "Okay," she said, quietly, her voice trembling. "Let's go." Jim grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, motioning for them to follow. Tiana clung to her mother's side as they stepped outside into the cool evening air. The world felt different now, more dangerous, more uncertain. The Serpents were close, and no place seemed safe. They climbed onto the bikes, and Jim revved the engine, the sound echoing through the trees. Tiana's heart raced as they sped down the road, the familiar sights of the cabin and the surrounding woods disappearing behind them. The world outside seemed even more menacing now, the shadows stretching long across the road as they drove deeper into the unknown. Tiana kept her eyes focused on the road ahead, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the Serpents. Who were they? Why were they after her mother? The questions swirled in her mind, but she knew now wasn't the time to ask. They had to survive, and that meant staying ahead of whoever was chasing them. The night seemed to drag on, the darkness pressing in from all sides as they rode further away from everything Tiana had known. The headlights of the motorcycles illuminated the road in front of them, but the world around them was swallowed by the night. It felt as if they were moving through a void, with no clear direction, no safe haven. Tiana couldn't help but wonder how much longer they could keep running. What would happen when they finally ran out of places to hide? They rode for hours, the road stretching out endlessly before them. The only sound was the hum of the motorcycles, the wind rushing past them, and the occasional crunch of gravel beneath their tires. Finally, they reached a small town, the buildings dark and deserted in the late hour. Jim pulled into a quiet street and stopped in front of a small, nondescript building. "This is it," he said, cutting the engine. Tiana looked around, but the street was empty, the houses and businesses locked up tight for the night. The place felt like a ghost town, but Jim seemed certain it was safe. "Stay close," he warned, as they climbed off the bikes. Tiana and Samantha followed him inside, the door creaking as it opened. The interior of the building was small and dimly lit, with a few old couches and tables scattered around. It looked like a safe house, just as Jim had promised, but it felt cold and impersonal. Tiana took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She didn't know how much longer they could keep running. The Serpents were closing in, and they couldn't hide forever. As Jim locked the door behind them, he turned to Samantha. "We'll need to lay low for a few days. Keep a low profile," he said. "We can't afford any mistakes." Samantha nodded, her face weary. "I understand," she said quietly. "We'll do whatever it takes to keep Tiana safe." Tiana felt a wave of fear wash over her as she looked at her mother. They were in a safe house, but for how long? What if the Serpents found them here? What if they couldn't outrun their past? The questions lingered in her mind, but she didn't voice them. She had to stay strong, for her mother's sake. They had come this far, and they couldn't give up now. As the night stretched on, Tiana lay awake on the couch, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. The safe house was quiet, but she couldn't shake the feeling that danger was closing in. She knew their fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The safe house was quiet, too quiet, as the hours stretched on. Tiana lay on the worn couch, staring up at the ceiling, her thoughts spinning in every direction. She had never felt so uncertain, so vulnerable. The Serpents were still out there, and she didn't know how much longer they could keep running. She wanted to ask her mother more about what had happened, what had led them to this point, but every time she tried, Samantha would just shut down, her eyes distant and filled with regret. Tiana knew that her mother had been trying to protect her, but the weight of the secrets was beginning to show. Jim had been a quiet presence since they arrived at the safe house. He checked the windows, kept watch outside, and made sure everything was secure, but he didn't speak much. Tiana couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more than he was letting on. "Why don't you go get some sleep, kid?" Jim said suddenly, his voice low. Tiana looked up at him, surprised by the change in his tone. He hadn't said much to her since. They arrived. "I'm okay," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "Just thinking." Jim glanced over at her mother, who was sitting in the corner, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. She looked broken, exhausted. Tiana hated seeing her like this. "You don't have to do it alone," Jim said, his voice softer now. "Whatever you're thinking, whatever you're feeling, you don't have to carry it all by yourself." Tiana swallowed hard, fighting back the lump in her throat. She wanted to tell him everything, to ask him about the Serpents, about her mother's past, but she couldn't. It felt like too much. "I just want to know why," she whispered. "Why is this happening? Why are they after us?" Jim didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the window, peering through the blinds. He seemed to be scanning the area for anything out of the ordinary. "You don't get to choose who you're born to, kid," he said quietly. "But you do get to choose how you fight back." His words hung in the air as he turned away from the window and looked at Tiana. "Your mom's been running from a past she's trying to forget. But you can't outrun the people who want something from you. You can only protect yourself and the ones you love." Tiana didn't understand at all, but she felt something shift inside her. Maybe it was his words, maybe it was the way he spoke with such conviction, but for the first time in what felt like days, she felt a spark of hope. She wasn't sure how long they could stay hidden in this safe house, but for now, they were safe. That was all she could hold on to. Jim turned back toward the door. "I'll keep watch," he said. "But if you need to talk, I'm here. You're not alone in this." Tiana nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that they would make it through this, but something deep inside told her that their troubles were far from over. As Jim stepped outside to continue his patrol, Tiana turned back to her mother, who was still sitting quietly in the corner. Samantha's eyes met hers, and for the first time, Tiana saw the pain and guilt that her mother had been hiding. "Mom," Tiana said softly, walking over to her. "Please, just tell me what's going on." I need to understand. Samantha looked at her for a long moment before finally speaking. I never wanted you to get caught up in all this, she said, her voice cracking. But I can't protect you forever. The serpents, they're dangerous. They've been hunting me for years, and now they're coming for you too. Tiana's heart raced. Why? What do they want? Samantha closed her eyes, as if she was reliving the memories. It's not something I can explain easily, Tiana, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I made some mistakes. I was involved with people I shouldn't have been. And now, those mistakes are coming back to haunt us. Tiana felt a mix of anger and fear bubbling inside her. You're all I have, Mom. Please don't shut me out. Samantha's eyes welled up with tears. I never wanted to drag you into this, baby. But the truth is, I don't know how much longer we can keep running. The words hit Tiana like a punch to the gut. She didn't want to believe it, but she had to. They couldn't keep running forever. They had to face the truth. What do we do now? Tiana asked, her voice shaking. Samantha wiped away her tears and took a deep breath. We fight. We have to fight back. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what was to come. Tiana nodded, feeling a surge of determination rise within her. If her mother was ready to fight, then so was she. They couldn't let the serpents tear their family apart. They would stand together, no matter what. The door opened, and Jim walked back inside, his eyes scanning the room. We've got to move out, he said, his voice urgent. The serpents are getting closer. Tiana's stomach twisted in knots. They were running out of time. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for sure. They couldn't let fear control them. It was time to face the people who had been chasing them, and they would fight until the end. The air was thick with tension as Jim led Tiana and Samantha down the narrow path leading away from the cabin. The sky was overcast, and the sound of distant thunder seemed to echo the storm brewing in their lives. Tiana felt the weight of the decision hanging over her, the choice to face the people hunting them or to keep running. The serpents were closing in, and they didn't have the luxury of time. She couldn't help but wonder if they were making a mistake, if fighting back would only make things worse. But the look on her mother's face, the fear and regret that had been there since they arrived at the safe house, gave her the courage to keep moving forward. Jim didn't speak much as they walked, his steps steady and purposeful, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The wind picked up, rustling the trees, and Tiana instinctively clutched her mother's hand, trying to stay close to her. The further they went from the cabin, the more exposed they felt. Tiana had never been this far from home, and the unfamiliar terrain only added to her anxiety. We're almost there, Jim said, breaking the silence as he glanced back at them. Stay close. We'll make it. His words were meant to reassure, but Tiana could tell he was just as tense as she was. As they neared the edge of the woods, the sounds of the town in the distance became louder. The road ahead was open, but it didn't feel like a safe escape. It felt like the calm before the storm. Jim led them to a small, nondescript house at the end of a quiet street. It was the kind of place that blended in with the neighborhood, almost too ordinary. This is it, Jim said, stopping at the front door. We'll lay low here for a while, but it's not going to be forever. Tiana felt a pang of uncertainty. They had no idea how long they could stay hidden. It wasn't like they could go on living like this forever, always running, always hiding. Samantha, who had been silent for most of the walk, spoke up. What now? She asked, her voice steady but weary. Now, we wait, Jim replied, his voice serious. We need to see how the serpents move, how close they are. If they've figured out where we are, we'll need to make our next move fast. Samantha nodded, her face a mask of exhaustion. She had been through so much in the past few days, and Tiana could see the toll it had taken on her. She was trying to protect her daughter, but Tiana could tell that the weight of her past was breaking her down. They went inside the house, and Jim immediately started securing the doors and windows. Tiana looked around the small, dimly lit room. It felt like a temporary hiding place, nothing more. It wasn't the home they had once known. It wasn't the place where Tiana could feel safe. The door slammed shut behind them, and the sound seemed to echo through the empty house. Tiana sat down on a couch in the corner, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She wanted to ask Jim more about the serpents, about what they had done to get involved with them, but she didn't know where to start. Everything seemed like a tangled mess of questions with no answers. Samantha, who had been standing by the window, turned to Tiana. We'll be okay, she said, her voice soft but filled with a quiet strength. Tiana looked up at her mother, searching her face for the reassurance she needed. "How do you know?" Tiana asked, her voice shaky. "How do we know this won't happen again?" Samantha's eyes softened. "I don't know, baby. I wish I could give you the answers, but all I can promise is that I will protect you. I've been running from this for so long, but I can't keep running anymore. We fight now. We stand our ground." Tiana felt a lump form in her throat. She had always believed her mother was invincible, but now she understood that even the strongest people had their limits. They couldn't keep running from their past forever. It was time to face it head on. Just then, Jim came back into the room, his face serious. "They found us," he said, his voice low and urgent. Tiana's heart skipped a beat. "What?" she whispered, feeling a chill run down her spine. "The Serpents," Jim said, his jaw clenched. "They're closer than we thought. We don't have much time." Tiana stood up, her pulse racing. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jim's eyes hardened. "We fight. We get ready. We can't run anymore." Samantha stood up beside Tiana, her shoulders squared as if preparing for what was to come. "We do what we have to do," she said, her voice firm. Tiana could feel the weight of her mother's words. This wasn't just about running anymore. This was about survival. The Serpents were coming, and they wouldn't stop until they found them. But Tiana wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't going to let fear control her. She wasn't going to let the past take away her future. As Jim started preparing for what was to come, Tiana knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together. They had no choice but to stand and fight. The Serpents may have been hunting them, but they weren't going down without a fight. The air inside the safe house was thick with tension as Jim began preparing for the inevitable. Tiana stood near the window, staring out at the darkened streets, her heart pounding in her chest. The Serpents were close, and time was running out. She could feel the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on her shoulders, the fear and uncertainty that had been building for days now turning into something much more real. Jim moved methodically, checking the locks on the windows, scanning the perimeter for any signs of movement. He was a man of few words, but Tiana could see the determination in his eyes. He wasn't going to let them be taken without a fight. "We've got a few minutes," he said quietly, as he set down his gear on the table. "I need you both to stay inside and keep quiet. If they come, we'll deal with them, but we can't afford to make any noise." Samantha, still visibly shaken but determined, nodded. She had been through too much already, and now, she was ready to do whatever it took to protect her daughter. "What if they find us?" Tiana asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jim's gaze met hers, and for the first time, she saw the weight of his own fears reflected in his eyes. "If they find us," he said, "we'll fight. We'll protect each other. No one is taking you anywhere, kid. Not if I can help it." Tiana's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure she believed in the promise, but in that moment, she didn't have much of a choice. They had no way of knowing how long they could keep running or hiding. Her whole life had changed, and she had to adapt to survive. She turned to look at her mother, who was sitting quietly in the corner. Samantha had always been the strong one, the one who kept things together, but now she was visibly exhausted, drained by the weight of their situation. Tiana wanted to help her, to tell her everything would be okay, but she couldn't even convince herself of that. The reality was far too uncertain. Outside, the night seemed to stretch on forever, the quiet broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. Tiana tried to focus on the sound, but her mind kept drifting back to the danger they were facing. She couldn't shake the image of the Serpents, their cold, threatening faces, the feeling of being hunted. It was all too much. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a soft knock at the door. Tiana froze, her breath caught in her throat. She turned to Jim, who motioned for them to stay quiet. He moved quickly to the door, peeking through the small crack in the window. "It's them," he muttered under his breath. Tiana's stomach dropped. The Serpents were here. She could hear the sound of boots on the gravel outside, the shuffle of footsteps getting closer. Jim motioned for Samantha and Tiana to stay down, to keep out of sight. Tiana's heart raced as she huddled behind the couch with her mother. She could hear the voices outside now, low and gruff, and she instinctively clutched her mother's hand. They were surrounded. There was no way out. The door creaked as someone tried the handle, testing the lock. Jim was quick to react, rushing to the door and bracing himself against it. ready to defend them. Stay down, both of you, he ordered quietly, his voice firm. Tiana's breath came in shallow gasps as she squeezed her mother's hand tighter. She could hear the muffled voices outside, but nothing was clear enough to make out. It felt like the world was holding its breath. The knock came again, louder this time, accompanied by a voice that sent a chill down Tiana's spine. "We know you're in there," the voice growled. "Come out, and we can make this easy. Stay hidden, and it'll get worse for you." Samantha's face went pale, and Tiana could see the fear in her eyes. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making it through the storm that was coming. The room seemed to close in on them as they waited, Jim standing by the door, every muscle in his body tense, prepared for whatever was to come next. Tiana felt like the world was spinning around her. She wanted to believe they would make it out of this, that they would survive, but the fear clawing at her heart told her otherwise. The tension was unbearable as they waited for the next move. Suddenly, the door splintered with a loud crash, sending a jolt of panic through Tiana's body. Jim shouted, pushing the door back, but it was no use. The serpents were inside. "Get down," Jim barked, pulling Tiana and Samantha low to the floor, shielding them with his own body. The room exploded into chaos as the serpents rushed in, their boots thudding against the floor. Tiana's breath was tight in her chest as she tried to stay as still as possible, her body pressed close to her mother's. She could feel her mother trembling beneath her, her hand gripped tightly in Tiana's. "Where are they?" a voice demanded. The sound of rustling filled the room as the serpents searched the house, their voices sharp and menacing. Tiana could hear them moving around, pulling furniture aside, searching every corner for any sign of movement. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her breath shallow as she struggled to stay quiet. "They're here somewhere," the voice said, closer now. Tiana's whole body tensed as she braced herself for what was about to come. She didn't know if they could get out of this, but she knew they had to try. With every passing second, the danger grew. They weren't just running from their past anymore. They were fighting for their lives. The room was filled with the sound of heavy boots stomping across the floor as the serpents continued their search. Tiana's heart was racing, her breath shallow as she pressed herself tighter against the cold floor, trying to make herself as invisible as possible. Her mother's grip on her hand was tight, but Tiana could feel her trembling. The tension in the room was unbearable. Every second felt like an eternity. "I know you're in here," the serpent's voice called out, low and threatening. "Come out now, and we'll make it easy. Don't make us tear this place apart." The voice sent a cold chill through Tiana's body. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but she knew they couldn't afford to make a sound. Jim, standing in front of them, his body rigid with tension, whispered, "Stay down, both of you. Don't move unless I tell you to." Tiana could hear him shifting his weight, preparing for whatever was about to happen. She could hear the footsteps getting closer, the serpents growing more frustrated. The sound of furniture being moved around filled the air as they rummaged through the house, their voices growing louder, more impatient. "They've got to be here," one of the men growled. "Check the back room." Tiana's heart skipped a beat. She could hear them getting closer, and the fear was nearly suffocating. They were only a few feet away, and she knew that if they found them, there was no telling what would happen next. Jim's eyes flicked to the corner of the room, and for a brief moment, Tiana thought he was going to make a move. But he didn't. He stayed calm, his hand on the doorframe, ready to spring into action at any moment. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. The serpents were close, too close, and Tiana's mind raced with fear. Her thoughts kept circling back to her mother's past, the mistakes that had led them here. What had happened to get them involved with people like the serpents? Tiana didn't know, and right now, she didn't have time to figure it out. All that mattered was surviving this moment. She could hear one of the serpents getting closer, the sound of his boots growing louder. He was heading straight for their hiding spot. Tiana's breath caught in her throat, and she squeezed her mother's hand, trying to stay as still as possible. The door creaked, and Tiana froze. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. And then, just as quickly, the door slammed shut again. "They're not here," the serpent's voice called out. "Keep searching." The footsteps grew fainter, and Tiana's heart began to slow as the immediate danger passed. Jim waited a moment, his eyes still scanning the room. Then, without warning, he jumped into action. He moved swiftly, pulling open the door and ushering them out. "Let's go," he muttered, his voice sharp. Tiana's heart pounded in her chest as she followed him, her body moving on instinct, too scared to question what was happening. They moved quickly through the house, slipping into the back alley where Jim had parked the bikes. The air was cold, and the street was silent except for the distant hum of traffic. Tiana could barely hear her own thoughts over the rush of adrenaline in her veins. She climbed onto the back of the motorcycle, her mother quickly following suit. Jim revved the engine, and without a second thought, they sped off into the night. The world blurred around them as they rode, the city lights fading into the distance. Tiana couldn't help but glance back, half expecting the Serpents to be right behind them. But there was no sign of them, at least, not yet. The road stretched out ahead, dark and unfamiliar. The only light came from the headlights of their bikes, cutting through the darkness. Tiana clung to Jim's back, her mind spinning with everything that had just happened. They had made it out of the safe house, but for how long could they keep running? How long before the Serpents caught up with them? She couldn't answer that. She didn't know how much longer they could stay one step ahead of danger. But one thing was clear, she wasn't going to give up. They couldn't. The night was long, and the road ahead felt endless. Jim drove with purpose, his eyes focused on the road, but Tiana could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on them. There was no escape, not really. The Serpents weren't just going to let them go. They would hunt them down, no matter how far they ran. But for now, they had to keep moving, keep surviving. As the miles passed and the night dragged on, Tiana could feel her exhaustion setting in. But she didn't let herself rest, didn't let herself think about what was coming. The only thing that mattered was staying alive. Jim took a sharp turn onto a side street, and Tiana's heart skipped a beat. They had reached another safe house, another place to hide. This time, Jim didn't even stop the bike. He parked in front of an old, abandoned building, its windows dark and empty. "Stay close," Jim said, his voice low. "This one's safer. But we can't stay long." Tiana nodded, following him as they went inside. It was even more secluded than the last place, hidden away in the heart of the city's industrial district. The building was old and decrepit, the kind of place people forgot about, and that was exactly what they needed right now. They had to stay off the grid, out of sight. They had to be ready for whatever came next. The building was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made the air feel thick and suffocating. Tiana sat on a worn-out couch in the back room, her eyes scanning every corner of the room. The dim light from a single bulb hung overhead, casting long shadows across the cracked walls. She was exhausted, her body heavy with the weight of the past few days. The adrenaline had started to wear off, leaving her feeling drained and uncertain. She could still hear the echo of the Serpents' voices in her head, the fear from the safe house still fresh. Jim had promised they would be safe here, but Tiana couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't out of danger yet. Her mind kept replaying the events from earlier, the break-in, the chaos, and the narrow escape. The fear that had gripped her heart hadn't fully gone away, and she couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Samantha sat beside her, her face pale and drawn. She had barely spoken since they arrived. Tiana could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of everything they had been through bearing down on her. Samantha had always been the strong one, the protector, but now she seemed like a shadow of the woman she used to be. "Mom," Tiana said quietly, breaking the silence. "Are you okay?" Samantha looked at her daughter, her eyes filled with a sadness that Tiana couldn't understand. "I'm fine, baby," she whispered. "Just tired." But Tiana could tell there was more to it than that. Her mother's words didn't match the look in her eyes. Tiana wanted to ask more, to get the answers she desperately needed, but she held back. She knew now wasn't the time. They needed to focus on surviving. The sound of a door creaking open interrupted her thoughts, and Jim walked into the room, his face set in a hard expression. "They're getting closer," he said, his voice low. "We don't have much time. We need to keep moving." Tiana's heart sank. They couldn't keep running forever. "Where are we going now?" she asked, her voice shaky. Jim's gaze was steady as he looked at her. "We're heading to another location," he replied. "A place where they won't find us as easily. But we need to move quickly. The Serpents are out there, and they won't stop until they have what they want." Samantha stood up slowly, her hands shaking as she gathered her things. "Let's go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't have a choice." Tiana looked at her mother, her heart aching. She had never seen her like this before, so broken and defeated. But she knew they had to keep going, keep surviving. They didn't have the luxury of stopping now. Jim led them out of the building, and they climbed onto the bikes once more. Tiana wrapped her arms tightly around Jim's waist, trying to steady herself as they sped off into the night. The wind whipped against her face, but it did little to clear the fog in her mind. She kept her eyes focused on the road ahead, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the danger they were in. The serpents were getting closer, and they couldn't outrun them forever. The roads blurred as they rode deeper into unfamiliar territory. The city lights faded into the distance, replaced by darkened streets and empty fields. Tiana couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that danger was lurking just around the corner. Jim kept his pace steady, never once looking back. He was focused, determined, but Tiana could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew they were running out of time. They stopped at a small diner on the outskirts of a town. It was the kind of place you drive by without a second thought, tucked away in the middle of nowhere. Jim went inside to talk to someone, leaving Tiana and Samantha to wait in the dark, silent night. Tiana stayed close to her mother, her mind racing with questions she didn't know how to ask. Samantha's eyes were distant, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. "Mom, I don't understand," Tiana said, her voice small. "What happened? Why are we running? Why are the serpents after us?" Samantha looked at her daughter, her face full of regret. "I can't tell you everything, Tiana," she whispered. "But I'll tell you this, they're dangerous. The serpents, they're not like anyone we've ever faced before. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want." Tiana's heart pounded in her chest. "What do they want from us?" she asked, her voice trembling. Samantha didn't answer immediately. She just looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling. "It's my past, Tiana," she said quietly. "Things I've done, things I can't undo. But I promise you, I never wanted this for you." Tiana's stomach twisted. "So what do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Samantha's eyes met hers, and for the first time in days, Tiana saw a flicker of determination. "We fight," she said, her voice steady. "We fight for each other. We fight to survive." Tiana didn't know what that meant, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of purpose. They were no longer running in fear. They were going to face whatever came next, together. As Jim came back outside, his expression grim, Tiana knew that their fight was just beginning. The tension was palpable as they gathered inside the small, dimly lit safe house. Tiana could feel the weight of everything they had been through pressing down on her shoulders. The serpents were getting closer, and time was running out. Her mother, Samantha, had been quiet since their escape, but Tiana could see the strain in her eyes. Jim, who had been their protector since the beginning, was still in motion, checking the surroundings, making sure there were no surprises waiting for them. His determination was unwavering, but Tiana could sense that even he knew the odds were stacked against them. The safe house felt like a temporary refuge, a brief moment of calm before the storm. Tiana could barely hear her own thoughts over the pounding of her heart. She kept replaying everything in her mind. Her mother's cryptic words about the serpents, the way Jim had promised to protect them, the sense of urgency that had only grown stronger with each passing hour. She wanted to believe they would make it out of this, that they would find a way to escape the past, but the reality of their situation was too overwhelming. "We can't keep running forever," Tiana whispered, her voice breaking the silence. Her mother looked at her, her face drawn with exhaustion. "I know, baby, but we don't have much of a choice." Samantha's voice was tinged with regret, and Tiana could see the fear in her eyes. She had never seen her mother like this before. The woman who had always been strong, who had always been her rock, was now just as vulnerable as Tiana felt. "We'll fight," Samantha continued, her voice steady despite the fear. "We'll keep fighting until we can't anymore." Jim re-entered the room, his face set in a hard expression. "The serpents are getting closer," he said, his voice low and serious. "We need to get ready." The words hit Tiana like a punch to the gut. They had no more time to waste. "What do we do now?" Tiana asked, her voice trembling. Jim looked at her, his eyes filled with resolve. "We face them head on. We take the fight to them." Tiana's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined a day would come when she would have to fight for her life. But there was no going back now. She had to be strong. For her mother. For herself. For both of them. Samantha stood up slowly, her hands shaking. I'm ready, she said, her voice hard with determination. I'll fight too. I'll protect you, Tiana, no matter what. Tiana nodded, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She wasn't going to let fear control her anymore. They had to survive. They had to fight. Jim's voice brought her back to the present. Get your things. We leave in 5 minutes. Tiana's heart raced as she quickly grabbed her bag. The time for hiding was over. The time for running was over. They were going to face the serpents, and they were going to do it together. They had no other choice. As they prepared to leave, Tiana's mind raced with all the possibilities, all the uncertainties. What would happen when they finally came face to face with the serpents? What if they couldn't fight back? What if they didn't make it out alive? The questions flooded her mind, but she pushed them aside. She couldn't afford to think like that. She had to stay focused. We stick together, Jim said, his voice calm and commanding. No matter what happens, we fight together. Tiana looked at her mother, who gave her a small, reassuring smile. For the first time in days, Tiana felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone. They weren't alone. They had each other. And that was all that mattered. The door creaked open as they stepped outside, the cool night air biting at their skin. The serpents were close. They could feel it. But Tiana wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't going to let them win. They would fight back. They would survive. Together, they made their way down the street, their footsteps echoing in the empty silence of the night. The world around them felt different now, like it was closing in on them, but Tiana didn't look back. There was no going back. They were moving forward, toward whatever came next. And whatever it was, they would face it together.